this is Coffee with Konnie, and I'm Konnie Lukes, and today we are having coffee at Bagel Time at 194 Park Avenue, which is right across the street from my law office, so it's a skip and a jump, and I get to meet a lot of neighbors and people I know running in for coffee and bagels, and they've gotten all sorts of awards here. You really should come down if you haven't been here. And today I'm talking to somebody I originally met 30 years ago, and whose acquaintanceship I have renewed because he sent an email, and I am here with Bob Dixon. Bob.
Hi, Connie.
How are you?
How are you? Good.
Explain to everybody how we met in what, 1979, 1980?
1979, 1980. I was involved in the school system in Worcester in organizing a parents group that was concerned about school spending and where the money was going. And we would talk to Connie as well as some other of the political leaders in the city about the concerns that we had, and we became friends. And
but you were running for school.
But I was also running for school committee. I forgot about that.
We were on opposite sides. I was trying to get elected, and you were trying to get elected.
It was the only time I ever ran and I lost. No. But interestingly, I found one of my campaign buttons the other day.
You should have brought it.
Home.
Darn, yeah.
So that was a blowback to
the old
days.
it?
No, I think it was good.
Yeah.
I think
Why?
It was good.
Why was it a good experience?
Because I think people should do things to get involved.
Yeah.
If you just sit back and wait for others to do, you're going to have to accept whatever it is they give you. But if you're involved, at least you have the ability to influence what might happen. But if you just sit back and wait, then you're going to have to accept whatever somebody gives you.
Now, you're a native of Worcester. You went to Gates Lane School, South High,
Went to Gates Lane, South High,
Worcester State.
Quincy, Worcester State.
Okay. Now, we're here because of a very traumatic event that happened in your life. Yeah. Well, actually, your son's life. But yeah, what exactly happened?
3 years ago, just before Thanksgiving in November of 2009.
It's like almost an anniversary date to this interview.
That's right. Bobby was returning a video to Blockbuster.
Who's your son? Yeah.
My son. He was on West Boylston Street, and as he was passing a Burger King.
This was near Quincy.
Near Quincy. Driver coming in the other direction decided he wanted to go into the Burger King without any apparent warning, slowing down, turn signal, turned in front of Bobby. Bobby was on his motorcycle, and Bobby had no place to go but into the side of this minivan. He was unconscious from the time he contacted the van and stayed in a coma for the next 3 weeks. Massive internal injuries, brain injury, but all of his organs internally had some amount of damage.
Who came on the scene immediately? Because he was near a fire station.
There was a call to the 911.
Yeah.
The firefighters and first responders from Worcester Fire Station 11 on West Boylston Street were dispatched, and when you get to the root of everything, those first responders are the reason that Bobby is alive today. They did everything exactly the way they needed to do it in order to give Bobby a chance to live. And it's hard for us to talk about the work that they did without getting emotional about it, simply because if they had not done what they did, Bobby may not have survived long enough to get to UMass.
What kind of condition was he in when they got there?
He was unconscious. Bobby never regained consciousness for 3 weeks. Yeah. He was unconscious, barely had blood pressure. He was unresponsive. He was white as they described it later on, white as a sheet. And they later told my brother that they weren't sure, that they didn't expect that he was going to live long enough to get to UMass.
He did get to UMass.
He did get to UMass.
And you got to UMass, what, 14
hours
later?
I got to UMass 24 hours later because I was in Asia, and my wife and I talked the whole time. We arranged for a conference call with the doctors, and to be a parent and almost 8,000 miles away and have a doctor tell you that they're not sure your son is going to live another 15 minutes is something that I hope no parent ever, or anybody has to hear about somebody that they love. And I had to make the decision on what to do, and I asked my two brothers, after we finished the call with the doctor, to find a Catholic priest to go in and give Bobby the last rites. I then got on a United Airlines flight and flew for almost 14 hours back to Chicago. And that whole time had no idea if Bobby lived or if he died. And, I'd made that trip quite a few times, and it was always when I'd land, I'd turn on my phone, I'd call my wife, and I would tell her, I'm here, going through customs, immigration. I waited 20 minutes after we landed until I didn't want to turn it on. I didn't want to know a voicemail. I didn't want a text message. I didn't know what to do.
Afraid of the worst.
I was afraid. I was terrified.
Yeah.
And I found, if it's possible, I found a place in O'Hare that was reasonably quiet. I could be alone. And I turned on my phone. And there was no voicemail. There was no text message. And I called my wife. And she said he's still alive. And barely, he's hanging on. And she told me that, he had the last rites. And I got on the next flight and got to Boston, and a couple hours, about an hour and a half later, I walked into Bobby's room for the first time.
And what did you see when you walked in there?
I think every piece of equipment that UMass had was in Bobby's room. He had nurses that were assigned specifically to him. He was in a bed that was rocking side to side, 45 degrees from center, because his lungs weren't working correctly and they kept filling with fluid. They needed to keep the fluid in the lungs moving so that he wouldn't start getting infections in his lungs, and it was easy for them to remove it. But Jen Turner, who was one of his nurses, was in the room, and I said to Jen, I didn't know her name at the time, how's he doing? And she said, he's okay. And I didn't think of very much.
Okay,
I'm looking at Bobby, and he didn't have any visible injuries. All of his injuries were internal. He had brain swelling, so they had performed a procedure to put a pressure monitor in inside of his brain or under the skull.
Now, we haven't told anybody how old your son is at this time.
Bobby was 31.
Okay.
And he was completely unconscious, and he was in a very, very deep coma. Respirator was doing the breathing for him because his lungs weren't working. And I stayed for maybe 10 minutes, and I left and went back out to see other members of the family and friends. And I don't think I left UMass for the next 3 or 4 days. I would sleep on the couch. Eventually, we moved into the Beechwood Hotel. But after everyone had left that night, I went down to the chapel. And I can tell you that walking through UMass at 2 o'clock in the morning is much different than walking through UMass at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You can hear your footsteps. It doesn't smell like a hospital. And I went into the chapel, and I spent a lot of time in the chapel. And I was thinking about what Jen said, okay. And I realized that she didn't mean, okay, he's going to live. She meant, he's okay, he didn't die. And it was then that this idea of redefining the meaning of words would become important. And we talk about it in the book, that...
Well, you've jumped forward, because we haven't even said that you're an author, and that was one of the spin-offs of this experience with your son and his really traumatic injuries.
Yeah.
What's his condition now?
Today, Bobby is living near Worcester. He lives alone. He's a paraplegic. And he lives what we consider to be a normal life. He's got pets. He drives. He does his grocery shopping. He goes to the store when he needs to go to the store.
When you were in the hospital,
yeah.
and he was unconscious, did you ever think that this would be the end result?
No. You don't know where it's all going to go. We knew relatively early that his lower extremities, there was no response when the doctors performed certain tests. So we had early indicators that he might be a paraplegic. But back then, his level of injury was at his breast bones.
Yeah.
And today it's much improved, but no, you don't know. We met with the leader of the trauma team the morning that I got back, and they weren't sure if he woke up from the coma, if he would even have cognitive skills. So you spend all of this time knowing that you've got this range of outcomes that could happen. And some of them that go from, okay, we can deal with that, to absolutely awful. But we realized that in order for us to influence the future, we had to stop looking backwards. And I think it's easy to get stuck looking back because it's safe, it's comfortable, we understand.
At any point, did your son say, I can't go on any further?
Yes. When Bobby finally came out of the coma on Thanksgiving Day, 2009, the first couple days he was pretty angry. He was mad at me because we didn't tell the doctors to stop. That we allowed the doctors...
He wanted you to pull the plug?
Bobby did not want to be a paraplegic. He was very clear that he wanted to be dead and that he wished we'd just let him die. And no matter how much you say to him, that was never an option. It was very difficult for him initially to accept that he might spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair.
How did everyone, including you, overcome that?
You have a choice.
Yeah.
You can either get caught up in the oh, woe is me, and why him, why now, or you can look at it and say, okay, we'll figure out a way to make this work. And we'll move forward, we'll look forward, we're going to take what God gave us, and we're going to make the most of it.
When you say make the most of it, at what point did you decide that you needed to share these experiences and become an author explaining what happened?
When I was living in Asia, I was writing a blog on different things. After a couple
We
days...
probably should explain what you do as a professional.
At the time, I was consulting with companies in helping them develop high-performing organizations, develop leadership, as well as develop global sourcing strategies. So I was spending a lot of time in Asia and other parts of the world.
You also learned how to deal with the media.
I learned to deal with the media because of my experience in being in
So when we say
politics
media, what do we mean? Because it's not appearing on a cable TV show with Coffee with
No,
Connie.
I mean,
it's a little more sophisticated than that.
I've been on national television shows like Fox and Friends. One of the things that came from the book is I quit my job, and as I was looking for a job, I found a couple of military guys that were struggling trying to get jobs. And I reached out to them and said, look, send me your resumes, I'll see if I can help. Both of them got jobs. Fox News found out, and I ended up making multiple appearances on Fox and Friends. And today, I lead the premier group on LinkedIn that provides pro bono coaching and mentoring to U.S. military personnel.
And you were in the armed forces yourself.
8 years in the Air Force from 70 to 77.
All right, at what point in time did you decide to write a book about what happened in your life?
It was after Bobby.
Your son's life.
It was after Bobby had gotten out of the hospital.
Yeah.
And people were saying to me, you need to write about what you guys did and what you went through. Because I had stopped writing the blog about generic topics and started writing it about things that you learn and you observe when you go through an experience like this.
All right.
And,
Your life experiences.
And people were reading it. It turns out there were thousands of people reading what I was writing.
Really?
And once Bobby had woken up, there was this huge relief because he could talk. We knew he had most of his cognitive skills. And the last entry that I wrote was, "It's over. I'm done. Emotionally, I don't have any more to put into this."
How long ago was that?
That was in January of 2010.
Okay. All right.
And then it was shortly after
It was
that
a few months after the accident.
that people started to say, "You need to write a book. You need to write a book." And it was coming from people in Europe, people in Asia, people in the U.S. And so I started writing the book. And today, you can go on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, buy the book, e-book, physical book.
Well, as we're taping on November 15th, this is the day that the book is going to be released.
This is the day the book is released.
Yeah.
So no matter where you are, go buy the book because the money goes to some very, very good causes. And I'm fortunate that I don't need the money from the book. And as a result, the money's going to go to trust funds for Bobby. And some of it's going to go to trust funds for first responders, other families that are having a similar experience but maybe are struggling with it, and people to help folks that work in level 1 intensive care units, which is where Bobby was in UMass.
Ah, okay.
So I have absolutely no intentions of making money with this book off of Bobby's injuries.
Now, when you contacted me a couple of months ago, time passes.
Yeah.
You were really trying to find out the identity of some folks.
Yeah. We know that Bobby is alive today because of the firefighters and the first responders from Fire Station 11 up on West Boylston Street. We are absolutely clear that if they had not done what they did in the way that they did it, Bobby would not have survived. I called the fire station several weeks after Bobby had gotten out of UMass and was at Spalding because I thought it was important to let them know how it worked out. And I was shocked to find that almost nobody ever calls them to say thank you. Nobody calls to tell them what the result was. And I was able to talk to the lieutenant, but most of the other people that responded that night had gone on to other assignments within the city. So we're now trying to work with the city to go find who those folks are and reassemble them.
And what are you going to do when you find them?
We're going to say thank you. Bobby's alive because of them. And we know that without them, Bobby would be dead. And I don't think people understand that EMTs, firefighters, police, when they run into find these situations, they don't give up. They didn't look at Bobby as something that was hopeless. They looked at him for what he was, somebody's son, somebody's father, somebody's husband. And they never gave up. Even though they didn't think that he would make it to the hospital, they didn't treat him that way. And we just want to say thanks to this group of people that allowed this book to be written, that allowed Bobby to live, that allowed Bobby's daughter to visit with him every weekend. Just to say thanks. And give them a copy of the book because they're in the book.
Okay. Now, when you say the book, and we're holding a hard copy up,
yeah.
But this is not the way it's really going to be distributed.
No, you can. If you're on Amazon, you can get it via ebooks.
Yeah.
You can get it at Barnes & Noble. You can buy the ebook or for your Kindle, or you can buy it for your iPad. And then if you want, you can buy the physical book.
Okay.
And it's a great read. I got a message from somebody this morning on my email on my way here, and she was complaining. And she said that I started reading the book at 9 o'clock last night before I went to bed. It's now 2 a.m. and I'm awake because this is one of the best books that I've ever read.
I'm looking forward to reading mine. This may not be the only form that you're going to be telling the story in. What else is in the works?
The national media campaign starts today. So I've got a PR team that's out working with the national press, the morning talk shows. We've got book release parties that are scheduled for Windham, New Hampshire on this coming Monday. In Worcester, we think at the Beechwood Hotel on the 26th. We've got one in New York City, one in New Jersey. And then we're expecting that you'll see us on some of your morning news, some of your morning talk shows, as well as we're working on selling the movie rights.
Movie rights? Oh my goodness.
And you know, that's the part of this that's really crazy is that I've never really been somebody that sat back and said, this is how my life is going to be. And so the idea that I would write a book just never occurred to me. But the fact that I'd write a book with my son's name on it, who's the same son that I asked a priest to give the last rites to, is just something that you'd never even imagine. And then with, you know, some individuals in New York that are thinking this would make a really good movie, it's just beyond what you would ever imagine for yourself. But we'll take it, and all of the money is going to go to help other people that...
Well, how much did Bobby's medical bills come to?
Bobby's medical bills right now are over $1 million.
And will the proceeds go to defraying some of those costs?
The proceeds will go to defray some of the medical costs that he has that are not covered by the medical insurance that he's got now.
And after you get through with that cost, where do you want to direct the money?
Well, once we know that Bobby financially, his income will be supplemented. He knows that he needs to go back to work. We want him to go back to work, and he will. He's going to start going to Quinsig. He'll start working, but we want some of the proceeds to be used to supplement his income. So there's a trust that's been set up to take that money. Once the people who manage that trust, and some of them are from Fidelity and some other places, say to us, there's enough money now to be able for him to supplement his normal income, then the rest of the money will go into a second trust to help to provide some type of support for first responders, other families that are deal with a similar set of experiences but maybe are struggling and need some advice or some help or some counseling, and then to people who work in level 1 intensive care units, which is what Bobby was in. I don't think I ever really appreciated or understood what they deal with on a day-to-day basis and the emotional issues that they deal with. But, you know, it talks about it in the book in terms of, there's a chapter that says, where do they find such men and women? Where do hospitals find such men and women? And it talks about the type of people that we met and what they deal with and their commitment to the patients, and that they sometimes hold patients' hands as they pass from this life to the next, and other times they bring people from the brink of death back to the certainty of life. But it takes a very special type of person to work in those environments. And we were incredibly fortunate to meet dozens and dozens of them. And you know, so we want to do something that might make their life a little easier as they continue to do their job.
Listen, when you get past the distribution of the book, the publicizing, the events to promote the book, the TV shows, the trust instruments, bottom line, what was the message that you wanted to send with this book? I mean, what was the basic reason you wrote it?
That you can face difficult situations like this or other difficult situations. But the key to it is stop looking backwards. If you get stuck looking backwards, you cannot begin to look forwards or move forward. because you get stuck in this cycle of, I could have done this, I should have done that, I would have done this, and that's not helping you. It's self-criticism, and it becomes a trap. So stop looking backwards and start looking forwards, and you'll find that you have it within yourself to deal with it, whatever the issue is.
Do you think you'll ever write another book?
You know, you're in politics. You've learned when people say, do you ever think that you'll run for this office? You never say never. So I don't know. I don't know.
How long did it take you to write this one?
2 years.
Yeah. How difficult was it?
It's difficult because there's parts of the book that were only added after I sold the publishing rights. It talks about my own experiences with nightmares as a result of my military experience. It talks about my divorce. It talks about my own difficulties in my own life. But it puts in context how I learned to meditate, why I met this guy named Ed Haupt that helped me learn to deal with things in a much different way that became valuable when it was time to deal with Bobby's
So somewhat of an autobiography
situation.
also, in addition to talking about...
There are some parts in the book that when people read it, they're going to say, you have got to be kidding me.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know that.
All right. I'm going to look forward to reading it.
Thanks.
And the name of the book is Look
Look Forward, Father and Son's Journey to Healing.
It was a pleasure talking to you and seeing
Thanks,
you
Connie.
again, Bob.
Same
And
here.
I'm going to be following the success of this book. And if you write another book, we'll have you back again.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you. Well, thank you for joining us. This has been Coffee with Connie, and we have been at 194 Park Avenue at Bagel Time, having coffee with Bob Dixon and talking about his new book, Look Forward. And please join me again next week. Maybe I'll be in your neighborhood talking to your friends, family, and neighbors, and to the people that are making a difference in our lives.